Hey everyone and welcome. Today we're going to talk through collision detection and object placement for top-down 2D games in Godot. This type of collision detection is pretty important for smooth gameplay in simulation games, and it's a problem that I ran into while working on my office simulator game. If that's something you're interested in, there are a number of other videos on the channel about that game, but you'll see in my example here, I'm trying to place furniture, and I need to know whether the new piece of furniture the player is trying to place will collide with an existing piece of furniture or with a wall or something else. We're just going to do a simple proof of concept together and build a project from scratch so that by the end of this video you'll be able to place objects in your game without them overlapping with each other. So in our example, we're just going to add a grassy background and then allow the player to place buildings that look like little houses, and the only stipulation is that those houses can't overlap with one another, and we'll also give the player some feedback as they hover over valid or invalid spots, and we'll also give them a message whenever they attempt to place a house in an invalid location. The very first thing we're going to do is add that grassy background just by changing the color that the player sees. Next up, we'll want to set up the object that will be able to be placed in the game. So you can either find or create some art. For this example, I'm just going to draw a simple house using a sprite. And if anybody's interested in that art, it'll be available in the repository, which is linked in the description below. So once we have that art, we're going to go ahead and create a new scene in Godot, and then we will add a couple things to that. The first is going to be an animated sprite 2D, which will hold the art that we intend to show. I only have a single picture for this, that house that I just drew, but I kind of prefer to use animated sprite 2D just in case I ever want to add animations in the future. The other thing you're going to add is a collision shape 2D to the object that will handle collisions. And you'll just want to make sure that the shape and size of that collider or collision looks like the sprite that you've attached so that they basically overlap one-to-one. So at this point we have the placeable object kind of ready to go. The next step that we're going to take on is implementing a free placement mechanic. So we want the player to drag their mouse anywhere in the viewport and then click and place that house. So we're going to create a new node under our main scene and just call that cursor indicator. And this is going to handle some of the logic of having a sprite that follows around the player's cursor. For now, we're going to get started by just using that house image again as the default animation for that sprite. Once that's set up, go ahead and attach a script if you haven't already. Go into the process function of your script and set the position of the cursor indicator to match the user's mouse position. This works as you can see, but we do want to add just a little bit extra to hide the user's actual mouse so that we don't get that weird overlay effect. Great, that looks good. So now what we want to do is handle the input of the user clicking the mouse and instantiate that house scene that we set up earlier at the position where the user's mouse is currently. Open up your project settings and go ahead and add a new action. I'm going to call mine place house. And then what we want to do is add the left mouse click input event to that action so that place house is triggered whenever a left mouse button is clicked. Once we've done that, we'll go ahead and add a input handler to our main script, and we'll check to see when that place house action occurs. When we detect that it has occurred, we'll go ahead and instantiate a new instance of that house scene that we set up a little earlier and place it at the location where the user clicked. Okay, so we're instantiating houses, which is sort of what we want, but you'll notice that they just fall. So there's a couple things we would need to tweak to make sure that we get that top-down look and feel that we're actually after. So the first thing we're going to do is go back to our house and change the gravity setting to just be 0. And that'll prevent the houses from falling like we saw as a default. You will notice though we still don't quite have the desired behavior. When you try to place these houses, they kind of crowd each other and collide and start to push each other out of the way. So we're closer, but we're still not quite there. To prevent this behavior, we just want to go and disable the collision mask on the game scene for the collision object that we have. The collision mask is just where an object looks for other objects to collide with. And you'll notice once that's disabled, they no longer check with and collide with one another. But we do have this overlapping problem, and that'll be the next thing we tackle. So what we're going to do here is override the physics process function. And in that, we'll get a reference to the world space, and then we'll start building up a physics shape query parameters 2D. And this is going to allow us to generate or create a shape and then check against the world space to see if the shape that we have actually collides with or overlaps with another collision shape which is in the world already. So the shape that we want to create here should just be the same size as the object you intend to place. I'm going to just hard code this for the sake of the demo. You might want to do this in maybe a little more sophisticated way in your real game. But essentially you just set the size of that house to the size of the shape in your parameters, and then you'll use the collide shape function to see whether there's a collision or not. So if there is a collision, then that object collision will not be empty because it'll have a reference to the thing that we collided with. I actually get the comments backwards here, so you can ignore those. And you'll see me flip these and figure that out. If it's empty, that means we didn't collide with anything, and we should be in a valid state to place an object. And if it isn't empty, that means we did collide with something, and we shouldn't allow the player to try to place it. So you can see now that collisions are no longer possible. While collisions are no longer possible, it's not obvious to the player what's actually happening. So I want to give you guys a little bit of a demonstration too of how you can update the cursor or the state of your game in general to show the player that the action they're trying to do is either valid or not valid. So I'm going to make 2 pieces of art just based on that original house I drew. I'm going to have one with a green outline and then one with a red outline. So whenever the player is going to hover over a valid spot where there are no collisions, we'll show an animation with that green outline. And when they're in a spot where there are collisions and they wouldn't be allowed to place the house, we will flash this red outlined house. So in order to accomplish that, after I've got the art ready, I'll just go add 2 animations that alternate between the base house and the outlined house. And then in code, whenever I detect that state of either being valid to build or not being valid to build, I'll just set that animation on the cursor indicator so that it shows the right thing at the right time. And I also need to play the animation. So you'll see me go and update that as well and just set a default animation. So this looks pretty good in terms of showing the user the state. There is a little bit of an overlapping issue where the cursor can be shown behind these, and that's just based on the order in which things are placed in the scene. To get around that, I just create a house container and then I spawn all the houses in that and make sure that it's rendered before the cursor indicator. So I think the next thing we want to go tackle is just a message to the player too. Say that cursor indicator isn't quite obvious enough. We just want to detect if they try to place a house in a spot where they can't, and then we'll flash a message that says can't build there for 2 seconds. So I'll add a label to the scene, and then I'll also add a timer to the scene as well, configured with a 2-second timeout. And then whenever these conditions occur, if the user does try to place a house and they can't build, I'll go ahead and show that label, and then I'll kick off my timer. And when my timer's done, it just hides the message. So you can see that work now. If I click in a spot where I can't do it, that message pops up and then disappears after a little bit of time. All right, I think we are just about done. The last thing I want to do here just to get this looking good is add a snapped call whenever I'm placing the houses or placing the cursor indicator. That just makes everything kind of fit onto a little bit of a grid so that your houses aren't just slightly misaligned. Obviously not a requirement, but I thought just something that might make this look nice. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you want more tutorials on specific topics, just leave a comment below and let me know what you'd like to see. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more content like this or updates about my own game, an office simulator that I'm making. I'd also encourage you to go and check out finalparsec.com. There's a lot of content and tools for indie game developers that might help you as you work to make your own game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.